talk last week, and I have never learned so much about cameras before in my life. It was absolutely fascinating. So I hope that you all enjoy it as much as I did. So without further ado, here's Stu Fabe.
Thank you. Wow. First of all, I just really want to thank the museum and to thank Rachel. She's been delightful to work with, knowledgeable, friendly, and it's been a very positive experience. So
For me too. Thank you.
I'm a collector, always have been. If you got, I'll try to speak up. If I can't, just do something and I want you to just try to imagine the time when there weren't any photographs at all. Nothing. The only thing that you could see in the way of a portrait or a scene was something that had to have been created by an artist's hand, either painted, etched, drawn with a pencil or a pen. That was the only way you were going to see a portrait or any kind of a picture of anything around. And then in 1839, Louis-Jacques Mandé Daguerre made the first practical and commercial photographic process, the daguerreotype process, known to the world. That was 186 years ago, which is a long time, but in the scheme of things, it's just the blink of an eye. And so I have always been fascinated with the early years of photography. What it was that got people to think about how do we capture an image and make it portable and permanent? And how do we end up eventually making some money at it? And so this talk tonight is going to be about, some invention and some enterprise. You going to take over now? So,
I just get a few photos from this.
I'm not paranoid, but people behind me makes me
a little slow.
Okay, so the reason I'm starting with this slide basically harkens to the concept of if you wanted a picture of something, it had to be painted, drawn, etched, whatever. And so that's where I start with these portrait miniatures. Homes, especially homes that had any kind of financial resources, they wanted to be able to see pictures, they wanted to be able to see scenes that they had only heard about, and they wanted some devices like the zogroscope, which is also called a vue d'optique in French, or perspective view. And this was a device where you'd take a scene like this and you'd put it on a table. There was a reflex mirror on a 45-degree angle and a big magnifying lens. Why they just didn't take the picture and look at it like that, I don't know. I think they were just excited about having something that was kind of new and exciting and a little technical so that they could show their friends and family members that they had some class. Okay.
Sorry.
This is called a polyorama panoptique. Before Louis Daguerre, as I mentioned, made the process of photography known in 1839, Louis Daguerre was a painter, and he also had a very large diorama, which was about 40 feet long. And they would create day and night scenes by cranking things and having lights coming from different directions. And it was something that was very popular, and he was very successful with it. This is just a miniature version of that. So the polyorama panoptique, we'd have these little cards like this, slip them in the back of this little box. Excuse me. And you could either open the top or the back, and you could create either a day scene or a night scene, okay? The reason I'm bringing it to your attention is that it was another way for people to have some sort of visual entertainment. This is a magic lantern. This one was a child's toy. It had a kerosene lamp here. That was the light source. It had a magnifying lens here. It had hand-painted glass slides that would get projected. But you had an open flame here, and this was a kid's toy. It just makes me wonder how many houses got burnt down by kids just getting carried away or not being careful. Anyway, one of the things I like is that this little man here holding up the lens. I don't know, they call it Atlas. He doesn't look like Atlas to me, but I've had this for probably 50 years or more, and I love it. Are you familiar with the term camera obscura? Raise your hand if you are. Okay? Means dark room in Latin, or a dark chamber. Okay? This was the earliest form of a camera, and the whole technology had been known for centuries. Essentially, if you've got a dark room and you've got a hole on an outside wall, whatever the scene is out there, you're going to see that on the opposite wall in your dark room, upside down and backwards by virtue of the physics of light. Well, this was significant. Light would come through here, hit this mirror. Sorry, I touched the screen. Get reflected, projected up here. And it was an artist sketching device. So artists would use this, they take it out in the field, and they'd want to see what they could draw. And it was their way of trying to come up with some sort of an image. But it always begged the question, again, how do we make it that whatever we're seeing out there, permanent and portable? Karen. Okay. This is another camera obscura. As you can see, this man here is sitting at a table. This camera obscura, light would come in through the head here, get reflected down onto the writing surface, and he would sketch what he saw. Oh, okay. And we had this curtain just to cut out extraneous light, the same way that you see old-time photographers throwing a black cloth over their heads just so they can view the ground glass when they were focusing. Another camera obscura. This gives you a better indication of a fella doing some sketching on the back of it. Okay. I don't know why I love these things. I just love them. To me, they're just, I love them. Anyway, moving right along. Daguerre. He changed the world. He made his invention free to the world, except for in one country, England, where he had a big competitor with William Henry Fox Talbot, who had come up with a different type of photographic process. But they weren't anywhere nearly as nice as the daguerreotype images, like ones in this case here, that you're more than welcome to come up and take a look at. Don't touch. And they're wonderful, even to this day. They have crystal clarity. But the only drawback with these was that it was a one-off. There were no negatives. You couldn't make multiples. So if you wanted another picture, you had to sit for another picture to be taken. These things were highly reflective. It was silver over a copper plate, highly, highly, highly polished. They were so highly polished that they called them, colloquially, the mirror with a memory, which I always thought was a wonderful expression. Okay, thanks, Rachel. This is the earliest camera that I own, aside from the camera obscuras. This is an American chamfered box daguerreotype camera. They call it chamfered because the angles on the front and the back were at a 45-degree angle, and that's why they call it chamfered. This was made with a rosewood veneer. Beautiful, beautiful pieces. I'm really, really proud of this camera. It's 1845, so it's about 6 years after the invention of photography. It's old. And in many ways, the tripod is even rarer. You just never see them. I must say that Marla has been a wonderful sport. When she's not shaking her head and we're just walking out of the room. But this is something that's a very special piece. Okay. This is a French daguerreotype camera. I brought it along. It's a sliding box box for focusing. You would move this in and out. You could do some finer focusing with the little knob here on the lens. You did your focusing on the ground glass. You'd move it forward, and when it got in sharp focus, then you would take the plate holder out, the ground glass holder out, you'd put a plate holder in, and then you would take your picture. And you would take it by taking, this was your shutter, guys. 1001, 1002, up to perhaps 30 seconds, okay? So this is, it's in magnificent condition, that's all I can say, I love it. Okay. This is called a Lewis daguerreotype camera, another American camera. It's significant because it was the first camera in America to have a bellows. And so and they did that for, it was cheaper instead of having, really fine hardwoods. It was more portable, it was lighter in weight. It was a significant camera. This was something that changed photography throughout America. There were in 1839, Samuel Morse was in Paris when Louis Daguerre announced his creation to the Academy of Sciences. And Daguerre gave Samuel Morse the recipe for concocting his silver iodide emulsions. He brought him back, Samuel Morse brought it back to New York City, and within a couple of years, people went just nuts all along the eastern seaboard. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore. I don't think Miami, but and this was something that it just changed everything. Portrait studios, some landscape pictures, a lot of them were portrait studios. Okay. This looks very much like this French daguerreotype, but it was a wet plate camera. And by that, it meant that the photographer would mix up his chemicals in his darkroom or in his dark wagon if he was out on location, or in a dark tent if he was out on location. He would pour it onto a glass plate. He would run out, put it into the back of his camera after he focused his camera, take the picture, then before the emulsion could dry, he ran back into his dark wagon, dark tent, and developed a glass plate that became a negative. And it was the first time, this was 1851, so like 12 years after Daguerre did his announcement. And that's where we had things like ambrotypes, which were similar to daguerreotypes, only that you could make multiples out of this negative. Or you could make tintypes and have multiples made from the glass negative. I don't know that I explained that all that well, but close enough, right? Okay, thank you. This was an all-metal camera by a guy named Adolphe Birch in France. The thing that was significant about it is that it was the first time that a photographer could put his plates inside of a camera and pour his chemicals inside the camera itself. And then after he took the picture, he could develop it with different solutions inside the camera. So it was like an early, pardon the expression, Polaroid, but that's similar to what it was all about. This was I love this little camera. It's only about the size of, it's small. It's a beautiful little wooden camera, very similar, and it had a porcelain tray on the inside, and you'd have this stopper here where you suck up your chemicals and you drop it down into the chamber here, squeeze it, empty the fluid in your stopper. And it was another one of those cameras that was an instant, like, inside the camera development. The thing that's fun about this for me also is that the name is Dubroni for the camera. Sounds Italian, yes? His name was actually Bourdain. He was French. But his father forbade him to associate the family name with his newfangled photography. So he created an anagram of the name, and Bourdain became Dubroni. So they finally figured out the optics and the chemistry and the physics of light, and they figured, now how do we make some dough at this? Well, how about portables? Or excuse me, multiples, not portables, multiples. So this camera, it's an English they call them 6 tube or 6 lens camera. You could create with one exposure 6 images that you could then cut up, snip up, and put into either an album or whatever. Okay, so this was one way to make a bunch of images just with one exposure. This is one of my favorite cameras, English wet plate camera. Excuse me. This would take 4 pictures. Here it is with 4 negatives, and here it is with those negatives developed into positives. And you could cut it, once you did, and there weren't any enlargers. So you would take the negative, you'd go outside, and you'd put it, they were all contact prints. You'd put it down on some photographic paper, let the sun hit it for a while, whatever a while was. And then you'd stop the image and you'd wash it off. And that would create another opportunity to come up with, cutting it up and making 4 images, not unlike these, or tin types, like this guy here. I don't know if you can see it, but check it out after the fact. The thing that, let's go back to that one second. So you see this black here? I think we all pretty much know that silver, like silver flatware, is very light sensitive, and over time, it'll tarnish, it'll darken. And so this was some of the silver, because it was a messy process. This was some of the silver that got onto this flap here, which was basically your shutter. I don't know if you can see this little doodad here. You would turn it down and it would open it, you'd lift it back up. That's how you did your shutter. Okay. Okay.
I like your technical terminology.
Which one?
Doodad.
Doodad. I'm glad you like that. I'm going to use that from now on. In about 1851 also, a Frenchman named Disdary created carte de visites, visiting cards, essentially calling cards. We'd come to a place like the museum. I'd meet Steve Aker. I'd say, Steve, my card. And these were basically calling cards that became a rage. Everybody carried them. They weren't expensive. You could have multiples made, and you could just pass them out to family and friends. This was an American one. They called it a Bonton ferrotype. Ferrotype meaning it was basically a tin type, like this. They weren't they weren't printed on tin though. They were printed on ferro. It would have been some sort of an iron metal. But they called them tin types because tin was perceived as being inexpensive. And so it was their way of saying, you can get photographs that don't cost a lot of money. The early daguerreotypes with silver on it, they were dear. It cost a lot of dough. These, you can't, you know, they were easy to carry around and inexpensive. During the Civil War, soldiers would have had, so Matthew Brady, if that name is familiar with you, he would have used tintype cameras. The soldiers would have sent them back to their families at home. And it was just a good, inexpensive way to create memories. I got this camera, it's called a Lancaster Gem Apparatus. Lancaster was a British company, Birmingham, England. And this camera took 12 images at one time. You would take this little handle here, you would pull it open, it would reveal the lenses, and then you'd close it to stop the exposure. Okay? And the reason they called them gems is because they were small. Okay? And you could either, they put them into lockets like this, or you could have pins. A lot of times there was mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, mourning pieces of jewelry for, that family members would carry to remember a deceased loved one. But these things they were a rage. I mean, just people, they didn't cost a lot of money and you could get a lot of pictures. So they made a lot of different little photo albums and all manner of different ways of carrying them. Joe, can you hear me okay back there?
You're fine.
Butcher's Royal Mail, same concept. 15 lenses, you push the button here, it would give you 15 pictures at one time on a 5x7-inch photographic plate. They call these Royal Mail, same size as the gems, but they called them Royal Mail in England because they were about the size of a postage stamp. So imagine these being, small, okay? That's the reason they called it the Royal Mail. Simon Wing was an American. Again, how do we make multiples? So you see this brass rectangle here? This is a viewfinder, which I love because a lot of times they're broken off. But you would take this brass rectangle and you'd move it to different positions, and again, you could get like 15 pictures. And this way, you didn't have to have everything being the same picture. You could have Carol could sit, that Wayne would sit, that Marla would sit. Jinsey was always looking for pictures. So this was a wonderful little camera. 1860, this is British, the Dolmeyer stereo wet plate. Great company. You could either take stereo views, like this, or you could use you could swap it out, take these off and put a single lens on for portraiture or landscape work. And it's a gorgeous camera. I mean, the box itself is wonderful. This doodad here, this was a flap shutter. So you turn these doodads down, Jinsey, and this would come down. So you'd raise it or lower it in order to open up the exposure and close it. Because it was such a rage, the stereo pictures, households wanted to have different viewing devices. Something like this was ubiquitous. Everybody had one. They were inexpensive. Or you could have nice cabinetry for in your parlor. This big lens here, you'd put a photo like this back here on the stand back behind it, and you could magnify it. Or you could take that off and put a stereo card on and look through these oculars here, and you'd have a 3D image. you're gonna see a couple of stereo cameras because I like them. So I'm gonna motor through these. Very similar thing, another Lancaster. You could either do single, lenses for portraits or landscape, or you could swap it out for stereo. Okay. This was made by J.F. Shoe, another British company, and it's a gorgeous camera. This is the first time you're really seeing everything that I've got, right? Her famous line has been, why don't you need to buy all these things? Couldn't you just look at books, just...
It's not the same.
Thank you. Okay, next. An American, this is the Anthony Stereo Novelette. Great, isn't that a great name? I think it's a great name. So again, stereo views, and the thing that was also interesting during this period is that photographers were traveling the world. They were going to see the Sphinx, the pyramids, the Taj Mahal, the great American Western landscapes. And it was the first time that people were really able to see what the world was like. They might have heard about it or maybe read about something in a book, but this was the first time that they could see pictures of the real thing. Okay. Another stereo camera, we can move on. Another stereo camera, we can move on.
All right.
But I love it. This camera here, it was made by a company called E Francais. I won't pick it up, but it's right here. This camera is here. Bellows. I love it because it's in beautiful shape. It's got matched numerically sequential lenses, and it's another stereo camera. I was talking with Rachel about this. So there weren't any telephoto lenses like that. Hold it up, John. There weren't any.
It's heavy.
Sorry to stress you, John. So there weren't any stereo cameras. Telephoto lenses or zoom lenses. So if you wanted to get a close-up of something, you got sneaky. They called these detective cameras, and I've got a number of different detective cameras. This one was cool because you'd wear a vest, a special vest. Inside the vest, it was like a little carriage, and this would fit in. I'm not going to put it in. It would fit in. This is the lens, and it would poke out through a buttonhole. There was a string that is attached to this little ring down here. Came in down your chest, down your sleeve, into your hand, and you'd go to take the picture. Okay? If you think we're having fun with our devices in modern day, these people were just turned on, having a great time. It was fun. It was a little clandestine. They weren't really detectives. They were just out having a good time, and so there were a lot of different cameras like that. I'll show you a couple more in a second. Stay. This was something called the Pocket Cozy. It was meant to look, it folds up all together. It was meant to look like a book. And the bellows was meant to look like pages in a book. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I think you get the picture. Scoville Antique Oak Detective Camera. Another detective camera, made to look like a workman's toolbox. You'd open up the front door here, the lens was there, the shutter was here. You'd pull a string and it would cock the shutter. You'd press the button up here. Oops, sorry, didn't mean to talk. It would take the picture, okay? Next. It's American, but it sounds English. When you got a name like Tisdale and Whittlesey, it sounds pretty darn British to me. The camera is inside, it's meant to look like a workman's toolbox. This was the camera here, it's on its, I'm looking down on it now. Had plates back here, what's the date, 1880? So this would have been a dry plate picture. Luann, are you awake or what? I think I put him to sleep.
I don't think so.
You know, anyway, wonderful camera, great condition. Next. Similar Scoville detective camera. Here's the camera, but it fit inside the box. All the controls were in the bottom. I didn't mean to embarrass you. He's my pilot. He takes me flying with him, so I gotta be nice to him. Okay, next. This was a very early dry plate camera, so there was no mixing of chemicals. You had commercially available dry glass plates that you could then expose. The scenograph, leave it to the French to come up with gorgeous design. The bellows is silk with gold lettering on it. And it's just a stunning camera. You'll have to forgive me, I get really excited about these things. At least Marla knows where I am when I'm up in my office with this stuff. This was called a Marion Academy. It took tintype pictures. 12 would fit in here. If you wanted, you take a picture, and if you wanted to get the next tintype plate to get into, you took the camera and you turned it upside down, and you pulled a lever, and it moved the old one out of the way, and moved the new one in, so you could take the next picture. This is called a Lancaster Rover. Again, made to look kind of like this would come down, it would conceal it. This was a shutter down here called a seesaw shutter, and it was another tintype camera that took, you know, pictures like this but smaller. Ford's Tom Thumb. Beautiful little wooden box camera. The camera, this is the camera. It fit inside the box. I love that it's got its original papered label still. And because Tom Thumb, the little person, I was trying to remember the politically correct term, little person?
You can say little person.
I can't say midget though, can I?
You've already said it.
Politically challenged.
That's me. Calling me a midget. Anyway, gorgeous handle. You'd put it in here. You'd take this little ring. That was your lens cap, basically. And you'd have your controls over here, and you'd take a picture. It's a great camera. The Demon camera. So some of you know that I've written 10 novels. The first 5 of which I had this hero who was this really handsome photographer who lived in Indiana, who was, he was upset. He had some issues. His fiance had been murdered, and so so this little camera here is about this big. This is the front of it where the lens is. This is the back of it, and the back is a lot more interesting than the front was. Anyway, a buddy of his who went to MIT helped him modify his, because he had a Nancy camera collection too. Did I mention that? And he helped him modify it into like a taser kind of a thing that you could either stun or kill people. I'll never forget Vicki Tim coming to one of my readings and saying, "Why would any woman want to be with a man like that?" And I thought, why wouldn't you want to be with a man like that? Anyway, so and you never find, so I bought this at an auction in Vienna, and and I keep them in my books.
So Marva, why are you with a man like that?
I ask myself every day.
To which I say, I sometimes wonder how she ever got so lucky. Okay. This is called a Bruins detective camera. Basically the wooden box, that's where all the plates go. This is a viewfinder up here. Rare as hen's teeth, especially in great condition. Another street camera, tintype, called a Darlot Rapide. And it took tintypes also, but it would have been a street camera. A lot of photographers, professional photographers, might have gone out to popular places like, the L'Arc de Triomphe, or they would have gone to the Eiffel Tower, and they would have taken pictures for tourists with cameras like this. Same with the Fowler Ferrotype. Say that 10 times, real quick, John.
Sounds Ferrotype.
Okay.
Once is good enough.
But you can see that it was a small camera, and it took, again, these little tintype types of pictures that you could put into lockets or on a pin or albums. Another great French camera. This was a plate camera called a Passepartout, and it took similar types of pictures. It had glass plates, so you could either do, or you could do tintypes, but it made smaller pictures. Some people prefer to call it the Griffin's Seiko. I prefer Psycho for whatever reason. Call me Psycho. This thing, it's an aluminum camera, folds down to about like yay, thin, leather bellows, early plate camera. Okay. Compagnie Française de Photosphere, or just the Photosphere. Take care. Thanks for coming. Right when you find work. Okay. So it was a camera that was all metal. The thing that I'm going to get a little off color. At my own risk, right?
This is your talk.
It also came in a stereo version. Side by side, it looked like a pair of boobs, but that's as off color as I'm going to get. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were checking with me to make sure that it was okay that you said that.
It wasn't, but thank you anyway. I won't be invited back, I don't think. This is definitely a museum piece. It's called a Sigrist, and Jumel refers to the truncated shape of this piece. This dial here allowed you to come up with a lot of different combinations and permutations for aperture opening or shutter speed. And it was said you could do a few thousandths of a second for a shutter speed. Why anybody would want to do that, I don't know. But it's a great camera, beautiful little leather case that it fit into. The Photosphere, another detective camera, made to look like a pocket watch.
So neat.
Okay. And the thing, it was made in America, but oddly enough, it was more popular in France than it was in America. But this, gave people an opportunity to just get sneaky and take some fun pictures. Expo watch camera, made in New York. Made to look like a railroad man's pocket watch. Had a little viewfinder here, lens cap up here. You would take that off, you'd cock a shutter on the side. It came with a little cassette that had film in it. And again, it was another way of just taking some fun, unexpected pictures. The combi. All metal, fit in a guy's hand. They called it a combi because it was a combination of both a camera and a viewer. After you took your pictures, you could pull off the back and you could see your pictures on the inside of the camera. You're gonna see a number of different view cameras, field cameras, like this Blair Lucidograph. Beautiful camera. I'm not gonna go into details on it, but let's move on. Rochester Optical Company, new model, improved, 4x5 view camera. Amateurs would have used this, okay? Could have been used in the field for just taking pictures like that, different scenes. This was a shutter. It's made by a man named Prosch, and they're gorgeous. And this one's, it's a small camera. It's smaller than this picture, but it's a beautiful little piece, very popular. Anthony was a big company, another view camera. I got a few more. Okay. The Blair reversible combination back. You could take this was a 5x7 inch back, you could take it off and put a 4x5 back on it, so you could take different size formats. Roush was a British company, tiny little camera, the British make they all make beautiful cameras. But this was a beautiful little view camera. Putnam Marvel. Right here. Not an expensive camera. The reason I bought it, I live in Putnam County. So, had to have it. It had the lens cap. You could change the aperture by moving this, we call it a wheelhouse stop. Take your picture. You'd focus onto this ground glass. Once you got it focused, you'd put a plate holder in there and you'd take your picture.
Is that an American camera?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's made by a guy named F. Putnam, Franklin Putnam, New York. English tailboard camera. Again, it's a smaller camera than this. It's really a diminutive, sweet little piece. I like these side flaps. It just gave it some additional rigidity so that, the back and the front didn't kind of flop around with the bellows. Question?
What kind of material are the squeegee things? The
bellows?
doodads?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. They were generally leather. Sometimes it was leather over canvas. Sometimes they were a sturdier paper. But most of the time, they were leather bellows. Not unlike the one that John Zeiner has got on a table back there. But you can see this. This is leather. It's a leather bellow.
Oh, yeah. And are these glued some way?
Yeah, it was glued onto some backing.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that I've meant to mention earlier, one of the beautiful things about photography that very few people talk about. So you'll remember in the beginning I talked about how before we had cameras, you'd have to have them, images, portraits done by an artist's hand. And then even with daguerreotypes, they were silver-coated pictures. They were expensive. But when you got into wet plates and you started creating negatives that allowed for multiples and then dry plates that allowed for multiples, it became the democratization of people having pictures of scenes and loved ones. Prior to that, only the wealthy could afford it. It came out, the technology progressed, and anybody could afford to have them. And it was the first time in human history, if you go back, and I'm talking, call it the 1860s, beginning around the same time as the American Civil War. It was the first time that people could have pictures, and they were affordable. And it's never been the same since. Well, it's gotten better. So, yeah. Another little, I got a few more. Another little view camera. Well, look at this thing. Go back again for this 1 second, please, Rachel. Is that just a stunning little portrait? Here she is here. Another view camera. This one's French. We'll just move on. George Eastman, 1888. He had already been doing sheet film. Film had finally come along in the late 1880s. Then he developed the concept of roll film. 1888, he came out with his camera, a box camera that looked like this, that was called the Kodak. And a lot of people always wondered what the name Kodak meant. It didn't mean anything except for George Eastman thought it was a name that was pronounceable and easily remembered, so it became a marketing thing. 6 months after he developed the Kodak, it had kind of a barrel shutter, but it wasn't very reliable. He came up with a shutter with a sector to it. And that became the Kodak #1 within about a year of the first Kodak, and that's what this is. 1889, it cost $25. You got the camera, it came loaded with roll film for 100 exposures, 100 pictures. When you got finished with the 100th picture, you sent the entire camera back to Rochester, New York, to Eastman Kodak. They would develop your pictures for you, send it back to you along with your camera, reloaded with another roll of 100 for 100 pictures. The expression, you push the button, we do the rest. That's where it all came from. A couple of years later, no, a year later, ordinary ABC Kodaks. Very similar types of things to this one here. They called them ordinary because cameras like this had nice leather on them. But we collectors far prefer the gorgeous wood, and they called them ordinary because they were wooden. And they held up a lot better than the scuffed and marked and marred leather coverings of the earlier Kodaks. But I always found it fascinating that they called them ordinary because they were wood and far prettier. The Luzo, made by a company named Robinson in England. Very first British roll film camera. Whose film do they use? Kodak's. A little handheld or a little tripod mounted view camera, 4x5 inch film or plates. Very simple, very inexpensive. Ingersoll Shore Shop. This thing is a little camera, little wooden box, dry plate camera. Ingersoll was not a camera maker. He was a marketer. This guy took inexpensive stuff and sold thousands of them. This one cost $1. He also had one of his earlier things that he marketed was something called the Mickey Mouse watch. Something that wasn't expensive, but he could sell. He knew how to sell. And that's what Mr. Ingersoll was sure was about. We're almost done. Little folding brownie, little folding pocket brownie, leather bellows. I like it because it's got a wooden lens board that the lens sits on. People had them. They just go to the seashore. They go wherever. Lightweight. Throw a roll of film in there. At that point, you didn't need any dark room. It was like what some of us older people grew up with. We call this the pocket Kodak, which is really pretty funny because this thing's a beast. I mean, it's, how anybody ever had a pocket that it would fit in. Whenever I think about pocket and big pockets, I always think of Harpo Marx, who would oftentimes wear a big trench coat with have a huge, never mind. He'd have a huge pocket on his front. I'll never forget, I saw him in a movie where he was at a buffet line. He had this big trench coat with a huge pocket, and he poured a soup tureen inside. Sorry about that. It's funny what you remember,
This
isn't it?
camera was designed for him.
It was.
Who's Harpo Marx?
Who's our?
Seriously?
Yeah, there you go.
Tell her.
Ow.
You probably went to school with him, didn't you? I knew she did. All right. We're almost done. Path A, baby. Path A. The newsreels. They had Path A cameras. They had Path A phonographs. You'd go to the movies. Before the movies started in the theater, you'd see a newsreel. A lot of them were Path A. I like this one because it came with I got all the 9.5 millimeter John, center sprocketed film John, and Will Rogers, Our Gang, Lillian Gish, Lindbergh's ticker tape parade in Paris, his ticker tape parade when he came home to New York, and I bought this thing back in, I can't remember, 1980 for like $90, and my dad and I would sit on the floor in my bedroom and we'd just turn off the lights and look at some of these old films. So this takes us up to about 1925. Most of my cameras in my collection are 19th century. And it just basically asks the question, especially nowadays with imaging, where do we go from here? And with the last slide, I say, the sky's the limit. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.